morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, whenever you are listening to this podcast. Welcome to the first episode of the TEAchers WORKroom Podcast. Can I get some snaps? Can you snap it up? Okay. Just as a reminder to those folks, the TEAchers WORKroom Podcast is a podcast by Black educators for Black educators. And essentially, we are a group of educators that have come together to discuss real-world issues such as politics, pop culture, race, religion, and social awareness. And I guarantee you that it can be, or rather will be, from very diverse perspectives. And bringing those perspectives are four very different but similar in many ways hosts. And so I want to introduce our hosts today. First, starting with Miss Leisha. Miss Leisha, welcome into the room. Happy New Year. Happy 2021. How are you stepping in and stepping up in this new year?
Hi, everyone. I'm Leisha. Welcome to our show. What I'm doing this year, so my motto this year is no more playing small, okay? And what that means to me is taking myself more seriously. So in terms of, you tell the universe what you want, and you have to be patient for said things to arrive in your life. So instead of filling my time and space or giving energy to things just because I'm in that waiting period, I'm actually going to conserve my energy and wait for the actual thing that I want. I know how it looks. I know how it feels. I know, you know what I mean? I'm waiting for the exact thing, and I'm holding on to all my energy until it comes. So that takes a lot of patience, discernment, and knowing myself well. That's how I am stepping into 2021.
Okay, you better work it out, honey. All righty, let's kick it to our next host, who, by the way, deserves a shout out because this year he graduated with his PhD, Dr. Courtney Baffle. Yeah. Welcome into the room, baby. It's 2021. How are you stepping in and stepping up in this new year?
Okay, I am stepping in, and first of all, let me just say thank you. And I'm showing up and I'm showing out.
Yeah.
Okay? And I think that what Leisha said was like very succinct and very well said. No more playing games. No more playing yourself down to make others, including your bosses, including significant others, including family, right? Associates, right? And I see Leisha's like, yes. Mm-hmm. So, no more playing small just to make others feel comfortable in their skin. So if you don't feel comfortable with who you are, then guess what? Too bad. Ain't nobody got time for that. And that's not on my watch. So yes.
Okay.
Not on my watch. Stepping, showing up, showing out. And I think just putting one foot in front of the other, because not just, graduating from school last year with a terminal degree. I think that just life in general just taught you you just gotta take every day counts, right? Yeah. And I don't have time, like Leisha, said again, to wait until another year to show up. I need to show up right now, and I need to show out.
Yeah. All right. So we're showing up and we're showing out with Dr. Bethel. Our next host, Miss PTW, I call her Mama P. Let's welcome Mrs. Princess Taylor Williams. Yes. Miss Williams into the workroom, honey. Mama P, it's 2021. How are you stepping in and stepping up this year?
All right. Well, I prefer to go by Stella. So welcome to all of our listeners. Okay. JG just put my whole government out there. Please do not Google me. But it's all good. Honestly, I think that's a trend this year. across the board. We need to be unapologetic, and we need to be bold. We need to hold space for each other, for Black women, for Black men, for Black people, and especially for our Black children. But I think for me, individually, just finding happiness is a big thing, you know, and understanding that finding your happiness is a self process. It's not something that you wait around for other people to do.
Yeah.
And that honestly has been my year lesson, and I am stepping into 2021, baby. Just finding my happiness, and you know, hopefully in this podcast we can do that together.
Yeah,
so
I love that. I love that you just said, like, you know, finding your happiness, like, really depends on you. That's it resonates with me, because I often say that, you know, the movie The Pursuit of Happiness, right? That's what it's called, with Will Smith.
Yeah.
Or whatever. I'm always like, yeah, but I don't think happiness is something that you necessarily pursue, but really and truly, it's something that you have to develop from within, right? You gotta dig deep inside and find out whatever makes you happy, and stand in those things and live in those things, right? So that resonates with me a lot. For me in particular, I'm stepping into 2021 more aware and sure of who I am.
Yeah.
And it kind of relates to what Leisha and Courtney said about, like, not making yourself small, right? For me, my spin on it is not settling, right? Like, I'm not settling for anything or anyone, who doesn't fit, or what doesn't fit my vision of excellence.
Yeah.
Or my vision of what I need at that time or in that moment, right? Or during this season in my life. Like, for example, you know, someone had texted me earlier this morning, and they asked me, like, a question, and I really felt the question was like an inappropriate one. And last year I probably would have, you know, been a little bit more what's the word?
Engaged with it.
Like, I would engage with it, because I don't want to come across maybe as being too direct or harsh or whatever the case may be. But then I had to come to the realization this one, like, yo, you feel like this is inappropriate, and you need to just name that.
Yep.
And not settle for a relationship, whether platonic, in this case it's platonic, not settle for a platonic relationship when the person does inappropriate things in there, and you don't want to tell them about it because you're trying to save the relationship. It's like, no, get out of here with that. I'm gonna let you know right now, I'm not on that. Don't talk to me. I don't know how to see that. Yeah, no, period, poo. Shout out to the city girls. You know, we love them. All right. So now that we've all introduced ourselves, you know, this week and last week, there've been a bunch of hot topics in the news, right? And I think that there are some topics that really impact educators, education, and by extension, students, their parents, their homes, that kind of stuff. And the first of which is this damn stimulus check.
Yeah.
Who got the stimulus check? Has anyone got this stimulus? Well, first of all, I don't know if we all qualify or not, but you know, my understanding is that, you know, the stimulus checks have hit some people's bank accounts.
Mm-hmm.
What was it? What was the number that they settled on? Was it 600? Was it 2,000? Was it 1,200?
No, it is actually 600. So the first round was 1,200.
Okay.
And the qualified, you know, there are qualifiers. You have to meet criteria, if you will. So, you know, this round, where it's like single people who earn about $75K or more, they don't qualify, but then they would then subtract $5 for every $100 you make over $75K. Right. And if you make, so then if you make 87K, you know, 87,000 or more, you're completely phased out. Right.
Got it.
You don't qualify at all if you're single. Yeah. If you file head of household, you qualify up to 112,000. So if your salary is
got
is about $112K, then you will get $600, whether you have a dependent or not. But you qualify. Well, most likely, if you qualify for head of household, you most likely will have a dependent, right? Mm-hmm. And then that phases out at $124K, right?
Okay.
And then if you're married and you file, jointly, then you meet the threshold at $150K. And if you all together make more than $174K, you don't get anything at all. So if there's a child who's like 17 and older, they don't qualify. Or if you file like an adult, like a parent or whoever you're taking care of, they too don't qualify. So only children 16 and under would possibly qualify, which is atrocious, compared to like Western Europe, compared to Canada.
Really?
We're in America, one of the richest countries in the world. We're arguing about giving someone a one-time payment of about $2,000, where Canada is giving $2,000 a month with no criteria. Go ahead. Like,
they did say Canada is a place to be, baby.
Yeah.
And it's the criteria is just weird, right? Because it's like, are we all not impacted by the pandemic? I'm sorry, huh? Like, sure, there's brackets of people who make this or that, but everyone is impacted by...
What about the... And then everyone is impacted, and the congressmen and women were making $100K as they debated this $600 for us.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. To argue over this.
Yeah.
Isn't there some crazy stuff?
Yeah. The irony of, America, right? When you just think about America and you think about, even the name itself, child. But anyway, you think about the leading country. Like, what do you lead? You borrow a stimulus plan originally from other countries, who have less, revenue than you. You borrow that, you send out $1,200 checks prematurely, and then you say, "Oh, we made a mistake." We made a mistake, and then we're not going to make that same mistake. So let's make it 600, so we don't go. I mean,
we don't break the treasury, basically.
Right.
Yeah, that's a really strong point, right? Because I think on a larger scale, what we have observed and experienced last day in particular, and this whole stimulus plan situation is an example of it, is we saw how much and experienced how much the systems in this great country are either broken or not put together properly or not well oiled. And it seems like it's across the board. So with the stimulus check, it's one thing, right? So that's like maybe like social welfare, I don't know. But then education is another thing because schools are closed. Then health is another thing because we're leading the world. I think are we leading the world in like infections and deaths and that kind of stuff. And it's like this common thread of, what the hell are we doing as the most powerful country in the world?
Supposedly,
right? Yeah. When they're, I think a Caribbean country earlier this week or last week reported no new infections over an extended period of time. Like their country was considered COVID-free. And Caribbean countries are considered developing countries or third world countries, right? And it's kind of like, well, if they can get to that point before turning the new year, what were we doing? And what do we continue to do? What do you think about it, Sola?
Honestly, I think we have given this country names they don't deserve, and we I mean, we've been living in a bubble of lies and illusions, to be honest with you. It's an illusion. And for a lot of us, we've sat in this place of, oh yes, we live in this hegemonic country. We are on the top. And then this happens and we're like, oh shit, where do I live? Right? Yeah. Like, is this actually a third world country? Yeah. You know? Yeah. So I don't know. Like, I just feel frustrated by the whole situation. And at the same time, I'm not, I don't mean to be the one, but I'm not surprised. Mm-hmm. I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, I'm a little surprised because, being born and raised in the Caribbean, in Trinidad and Tobago, you see, cable TV and the media in general, you see all these images, right, of America being the place to be or the country to emulate or, the country whose culture you want to bring into your own culture, right? This superpower of the world, this country that has so much advancements and so on and so forth. And so you aspire to be like America, but in moving here and in living and working, particularly in education, and this is how I became kind of learned all of this, you get to realize that it's very similar to what you said, Stella. It's all a facade. It's literally like centuries and centuries of advertising and marketing yourself as something that you're not, which is crazy. And I think that last year in particular, and honestly, I think it's going to seep into this year, it's like people, I think the vast majority of people are just struggling to come to terms with the actual reality, right? The actual reality. So let's pivot, right? Because we talked about the stimulus check and like on a larger scale, like broken systems and stuff like that. School has been out for how many months now?
9. Is it going on 10?
Like almost a year.
Yeah,
almost a year.
March will make 1 year.
Right.
Yeah, March will make 1 year. So we're about
12 months. Yeah.
2 months shy, right? 2 months and a couple weeks shy. This morning I saw an article from Annapolis here in Maryland, where parents started protesting, right? Now that we're in the new year, they want schools to be open. We're all educators. How do we feel about schools opening?
I mean, I had, if you will, I actually missed going into the building, right? So, I was like, this year, I haven't been in the building since March, right? And I was like, I really wanted to go into the building this year, right? I was hopeful, right? And then with my position, because I speak to a lot of parents and, students about attendance, a lot. And it's actually, it's just sad that I want to put it in good terms, but I just want to say it like very like rawly, that the lack of concern, right? So I get it. I get that, like, I want my child back in the building. And then schools are like, these children are failing and, we got to get them back in the building. But I'm like, well, some of them fail while they're in the building, right? So,
and
it's like, okay, just because you get to see it for yourself, but like, this is what we have been saying for years.
We've been calling about.
We've been calling, right? And it's like the only difference is they were failing at school and now they're failing from home, right? And you as a parent, you have complete control over that because you have been provided resources. The school has been, I know our school, our network has made everything available. Up until up until December, we were still passing out material.
Same here.
So yeah.
Dr. Bedell, I have to piggyback on that, because what this has done is unraveled truths that teachers have been saying for years.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing for me is the lack of independence that our kids just don't have. Yeah. They just don't have. And, to be honest, like, being remote could have been a very different experience had our kids had that sense of independence.
Yeah.
We've been saying it all year round. But now that you are forced to, and let me not go too much on a tangent, because I know we're going to hold this for another podcast. But listen, we need to think about how are we, not training, but how are we raising our students, our kids to be independent?
Yeah.
That's the big thing in the world.
Right.
Yeah.
But can I interject before you listen? And you said something that, as in the African American community, or people of color, you said, how are we raising kids, right? And the biggest misconception is that school raises kids. We have a
magic wand, and it's like,
by default, schools have been
it's a village.
Schools have been raising kids, which is fine. But when it comes to parents 100% relying on schools to do, we were going above and beyond for years, right? Historically, as educators. But now that a lot of parents had to be, if you will, a parent, let me get you up in the morning, let me make you breakfast, let me get you at this computer, let me walk you through this work. If you haven't done that for 8, 9, 10 years, and you're trying to do that at this point in a child's life, even 6 years, right? Yeah. If you just, hey, get up, get dressed, go, as compared to, let me walk you through this, let's do this. And you have trained them to, already do that. Like Scylla has said, the independence of doing that. By 2nd grade, I was already washing and ironing my uniform and getting myself up and out the door when I was supposed to.
Hello.
Yeah.
So
I want to backtrack on it a little bit and think about, or rather, posit the things, some of the preventative measures that could have been put in place, or support measures that could have been put in place on a more federal level, right? So my point about that is that if we claim to have so much financial resources, and that we can allocate monies to different departments to achieve different things, right? And in this one country, we have so many for-profit and even non-profit, but let's focus on the for-profit corporations that have these $1 million and $1 billion profiles. I think that we were negligent as a country in government, but also our corporations, not to have intervened in a way to better support schools. And what I mean is that we construct so many big buildings and institutions that, because of the pandemic, are going unused right now, right? Like our arenas and so on and so forth. Why couldn't there have been some sort of plan to outfit these buildings to allow social distance teaching, right? Why could there not been a plan to increase pay to educators to work longer hours, or to work like a shift system where some teaching and learning can happen in the beginning of the day, some teaching and learning can happen in the end of the day because of the numbers and having to separate the numbers and so on and so forth. So I think we failed in that regard, right? That much more should have been done in the earlies to kind of create educational environments that would allow for social distance learning and teaching. So I think that that's one. as it relates to the parents protesting to have schools reopen, I get it. I understand it. And I completely agree with Sulla and Dr. Bethel in that regard. And I think that the motivation to have schools reopen on behalf of parents, I'm not sure that it's coming from a place of, well, I want my child to be in school learning. I think it's mostly coming from a place of, well, I just don't want them at home learning. Send them wherever you need to send them, right? But I just don't want them at home. And what you all said about, like, eyes are being opened to things that teachers have been calling, emailing, and talking about for a long time, but now you're seeing it in your own household, and you're not even sure how to handle it because some of you have not been as engaged in the whole school thing, like the PTA meetings and the report card nights and the coming in to meet about your child's, grades in the mid-year before you get to the end of year, that kind of things. And Dr. Bethel, you said something that alluded very much to habits. And I'm a big proponent of mindsets and habits, right? And in this classroom, there is little evidence that habits are being worked on at home. And I'm not saying that that's the case, because I don't know for sure. I'm not in every student's home. But in the classroom, I can say for sure there is overwhelming evidence that certain competencies are not being taught and practiced, and habits or reinforced, and habits are not being taught and practiced at home. Because one thing that my mom always said was charity begins at home, and that your parents are your first teachers. Yeah. Miss Leisha, what do you think?
I'm thinking about a number of things, like along with what everyone else has shared. It's just, the need for parents to want schools to open back or reopen. It's less about, I want my child to be in an authentic learning setting or back in a setting where they're actually learning. It seems more coming from a space of wanting to absolve responsibility, right? Like, the teachers need to deal with this. I don't know what's going on. This is too much for me. I'm not used to all this. For me, as an educator, obviously, we want to be back in the classroom because that's the nature of our work, is to be in person with our scholars. Remote learning has its challenges, right? Like, I feel like I don't know my learners as much as I like to know them. I don't know who is good at X, Y, Z, or who they are as true learners, right? But then I do think about the health hazards, and like we've been saying, this country hasn't done what we would expect it to do to make us feel comfortable to go back into a setting where there's kids. I mean, you guys are teaching, I think most older kids, I'm teaching like 9 and 10-year-olds. What is that like? I mean, them masked up all day, I'm masked up all day. Like, and I just have no idea what that would look like as far as capacity, as far as just like reality. How real is that? And then how authentic is it to the nature of learning, right? Like, it almost seems like, well, we might as well stay remote because it's just a lot to consider. And the country hasn't made us feel comfortable enough to say, you know what, they got us, they're going to figure it out for us. We're going to be safe. And these are things that we shouldn't have to worry about. But sadly, it's what we have.
And
to
I want to
consider.
acknowledge, for the listeners, that we know it is a challenge. It's not only a challenge for the learner and the parents, but it's also a challenge for the teacher, right? Because we have many teachers who are also parents too, right? And as Leisha just said, it is not natural for us to teach in this way. So I want to acknowledge that it is a struggle, and I want to also acknowledge that there are parents who want schools to reopen for the right reasons, right? The thing that comes to mind, and attached to what Leisha said about like, we have not set ourselves up as a country to make teachers and learners more comfortable with going back into the physical building. I think about online college, right? And when that had become a new phenomenon in the education world, and how much our traditional mindset around education stood in the way of a whole lot of educators in the primary and secondary levels in particular, stood in our way of really and truly exploring this virtual learning at those levels. Because the writing was on the wall. We've seen so much advancement in technology. We're giving our kids devices by the age of 5. It's like there should have been so much more consideration for the direction that we were heading, particularly in primary and secondary education. I think this is a great segue into the heart of our podcast, right? Which
wait, AG, can I submit something before you?
Go ahead.
That can further. This can be a topic for another day, right? And something that you mentioned about like the structures, the resources, right, in education, right? Because we know, and we've seen resources wasted. I think it goes back to, you said, why haven't we, right? And if you think on like a smaller scale than a granular scale, it all goes back to leadership, right? So like leadership at the local school level, which I think I could say that at my school has been phenomenal, with providing students resources, with providing, calling and the structures that were set up, right? Because I was thoroughly impressed when I joined the team to see how they were doing online school, right? But it goes back to, on a granular scale, like you said, why haven't we set up like locations, like places? And it's always like the teachers are not brought to the table, because all of these decisions are being made for teachers, about teachers, surrounding teachers. But it's like, well, who has actually asked the teacher, hey, how could this work? What do you all need? I don't know about for you. I don't know if anybody at your schools or any, like you said, the listeners, if anyone has come to the table and say, hey, let's pause. What do we need? Are we going in the right direction? Do we need to pivot? What other resources can we, push out to you all? But I want to submit before we transition is that we're always jeopardizing the teacher's health, right? So watch this. So right now you want to put the teacher physically, in danger, but teachers have been emotionally, mentally, in jeopardy for years. Your mental health, your emotional health. So it's almost like, well, what's the difference now? Because it's always like, well, let the teachers do it, or put the teachers in there. Physically, like you said, or emotionally, no one is concerned with the health, the overall well-being of the classroom teacher.
Yeah, that is that's a great point. We've seen that, and we've lived that. The four of us. We got stories for days as it relates to the well-being, as it relates to the well-being of our teacher, right? And it's one of the reasons that we decided to also, start this podcast, right? Because there is strength in unity, and you find healing You find resolution. You find, a comfort in these in knowing that, wait, I'm not the only person, right, that feels this way or that
alone.
thinks this way, because I'm going home and I feel like shit.
Yeah. And I think that's how we gravitated to us. I think we liked each other initially, just because we liked each other. But I think that, I remember us being at school late, and especially like JG, like we would be getting food at like 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
But okay, so let's transition into the heart of the episode, because it's very much connected to all of what we've been talking about. But I want to pull out a word that Dr. Bethel just used, which is leadership, right? And that a lot of what happens in a school is hinged on the leadership at that school, right? So last week, one of, I believe, is an American hero, particularly within the education industry, passed away, and that's Joe Clark, the famed principal of the Eastside High School in New Jersey. Shout out to New Jersey. He passed away at the age of 80-something last week, and it was all over the news and stuff like that. And we know that Joe Clark has been a polarizing personality throughout history, right? Even in his death, there are a lot of stories put out there around the difference of opinions that people have around his leadership and what he has done in his career. So I want to kick it to Leisha to tell us a little bit more about who Joe Clark was.
Yep. So let's start. Okay, you guys, I hope you're seated, because we have a lot of information about Joe Louis Clark. So he was born in Rochelle, Georgia on May 8th, 1938. When he was 6, his family and himself moved to Newark, New Jersey. He attended Newark Central High School, and then he attended William Patterson University, where he earned his bachelor's degree. He then attended Seton Hall, where he earned his master's degree. Right after that, he pursued his post-collegiate career as a U.S. Army Reserve sergeant and drill instructor. He then entered the education field. So first as a grade school teacher at PS 6, which was in Patterson, New Jersey. While he was a teacher, he also simultaneously served as the director of camps and playgrounds in Essex County, New Jersey, right? So he was holding 2 positions at the same time. In the late 1970s, he found his calling in administration. He became the principal of PS 6, in which he transformed, or what we call turned around the school, right? In 1982, Clark left PS 6 to serve as principal for the notorious Eastside High School. And I'm going to read a little bit about the methods in which made him controversial, that he used to turn around this school. So I'm reading from a site called We Buy Black. That's my source. So Clark was not afraid to get tough with unruly students. In order to exhibit power over the students, he would walk around with a 36-inch baseball bat in one hand and a bullhorn in the other. He used the bullhorn in order to be the loudest, dominating voice there. And he was ready to use the bat if need be. As stated previously, we know that these were, very controversial tactics to turn a school around. So many students, parents, and faculty members associated with Eastside High didn't approve of Clark's methods. Some felt that he was too harsh on the students. However, they couldn't deny that his methods elicited positive results. Truancy and tardiness was reduced, and the drug pushers no longer congregated on or around the campus. So these were positive things that he, his methods had made happen. So while turning the school around, he conducted many interviews, right? So he started to gain notoriety and fame. He was on a TV show called 60 Minutes, Arsenio Hall. He even was on the cover of Time magazine during this time with his famous baseball bat and his bullhorn. After this time, he was offered a position from the White House, from Ronald Reagan and their administration, because they praised his work, right? But he later declined it, right? Because his heart was with Eastside High. He wanted to stay there and continue to turn around the school. He did retire as principal of Eastside High after undergoing 2 open heart surgeries. He resigned in 1989. He then began working as the director of Essex County Detention House, which was a juvenile center in Newark. He also wrote Laying Down the Law, which was his book that described his methods and tactics that he used to turn the schools around. He began lecturing on school management and education reform. He was also offered an opportunity for his, life to be portrayed in a movie or film by Warner Brothers. They offered him 6 figures plus royalties. But we know that film today as Lean on Me, in which he was portrayed by Morgan Freeman. He had three kids, Joetta, Hazel, and JJ, and his grandchildren, Talitha, Jorel, and Hazel. And we know that Joe Lewis Clark just passed away last week, Tuesday, at the age of 82 in his home in Gainesville, Florida. So, having said all that, what are our thoughts on, because we're educators, right? So many of us have watched the movie Lean on Me, or maybe have read about his legacy as children or when we were younger. But now that we have educator eyes, I just wonder, do we agree with Joe Clark's tactics to lead a school? What do we think?
I want to start off by saying, maybe we need a breath.
We could take a minute. We could take a minute. That was a lot of information.
TEAcher for that well-established bio on Mr. Clark. And rest in peace to Mr. Clark. First and foremost, he has now entered the realm as an ancestor, and we should definitely acknowledge that. Mm-hmm. So we need to take a minute for that. Mm-hmm. Okay, now let's really get down to it. Because when I hear this word controversy, I'm wondering controversial to whom, okay? Mm-hmm. And let's start off by saying public education didn't really start until Reconstruction, okay? And there was for a significant amount of time where we were segregated. And segregated, for me, is a phenomenal thing. And I know that is a very... I know that is a controversial statement.
About it.
Yeah. FYI, Sula, I think it's important that the listeners know that you are a history.
Right.
Well, I mean, listen, you're going to get that from my record.
This is our history educator, honey.
Yes, I am a history teacher and I am a history lover. But for me, segregation is important. When we began to desegregate, what happened is we opened the door for individuals that do not look like us to start to pass judgment on the way that we have always instilled behavioral management. Okay. Mm-hmm. So, I could talk forever, but I just want to stamp that I am an advocate for Joe Clark. I am a huge advocate for his tactics. Okay, go around the school with some blowhorns. Yes, absolutely. Okay, you don't want to be here. Okay, step outside. Mm-hmm. Okay,
we're gonna do what needs to be done. Period.
Well, I mean, contrary to popular beliefs, I do not agree with the way that Joe Clark ran the school. Right, and let me tell you why. Number one, because when I was in high school in 9th grade, we had a similar situation to where we had a change of principals, and the principal came in, and it was crazy because he used those phrases and words like, we have to move expeditiously, to class, and he would use the bullhorn. He didn't have a bat, right? So, because I think that was extreme, and it was in his listen. But anywho, in the interview online that, we watched, Joe Clark said the bat was because, what did he say? He said,
yeah.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead, friend. Go ahead. So he said So Joe, this
Right.
is him on carrying the baseball bat, right? Young people, it's your turn to bat. What are you going to do? Strike out or hit a home run?
But the thing is, like, okay, and then the bullhorn, like you said, like really and truly is like, let me be the loudest voice or whatever, right? So I'm like, all right, some of the tactics, yes, to turn the school around, but I saw it as like herding, right? You know, like you herd sheep, and sheep are trained to specifically listen for a voice, or they are trained to like move in this direction, move in that direction, right? So I think I agree with, Sula in that, like, the integration was detrimental, right, to our schools for sure. And I think segregation might have been the best way to go. But I think that for someone who does not look like us, right, when they watch movies, like you said, it really influences their need for power, right? Like, this is how you control. This is how Black and brown kids have to be controlled, right? And it's like, no, they don't need a bat. They don't need a bullhorn. They need understanding. And not saying that you were making, excuses, because, all of us, I believe we run very tight ships, right? Without a bat, without the bullhorn, but with like understanding and still holding them to, high expectations. So I think that, I just believe that we just, even as people of color, we just have to be mindful of how we come across and lead schools that have minority students. And
I'm sorry, Doctor. I want to be very clear on what you just said. Are you saying no to the bullhorn, or are you saying no depending on who is holding the bullhorn?
I'm saying no to the bullhorn. Period.
Right. I was about to draw that connection right there, Scylla. Right. That what it sounds like is that, Dr. Bethel, your concern is how his tactics are seen and then utilized by others that may not have the same kind of cultural awareness and that kind of stuff, right?
Not their place.
Am I correctly?
Yeah, it's a part of. I think it's a double-edged sword.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
For me, I go back to, because I'm very up in the sky. See the whole forest kind of thinker. I go back to what was the state of the school when he was given the principalship there, and what needed to be done to turn it around, right? So that's where a lot of my thinking go. And the California, I think it was the California Board of Education at that time in the 80s, would have done some research and gathered some data which said that schools that were in the same position as Eastside High during that period were facing things like drugs, rape, robbery, alcohol, pregnancy, suicide, assault, burglary, arson, and even bombings, apparently, right? During that time. So when I think, I admire Joe Clark. For me, it's not a matter of agreeing or disagreeing with his tactics. My mind goes directly to what he as a leader saw as the need at that school at that time, and how did he think that or rather what did he think he needed to do to ensure that he sent a strong message to students and staff about the culture shift that was about to take place. And for me, it comes down to, well, if it is that at that time, based on the data he had, the blowhorn and the bat and the zero tolerance approach was the thing that the school needed. And then following that, we saw positive effects coming out of that with the improvement of the test scores and the order, in the school and that kind of stuff. And then students actually, after a couple of years, started to praise and thank him for his approach. Then I'm like, all right, well, you did your thing, right? I think for, in watching Lean On Me, because I have shown Lean On Me at every school that I've worked at. And I have made a career, as you guys know, of moving to turn around schools. I've, in retrospect, that's what I've done as my career, from elementary straight up to high school, even now at an alternative high school. And based on my experience at these different schools, I can say that a different approach was needed at these different schools. And I'll be honest, I have been called Joe Clark at schools before because of the approach that I took to helping them turn around behavior at that school, right? Like at the last school that I was at, it was a very much of the goal was we need to establish or reestablish an environment that is conducive to learning for at least 80% of the students in a particular class. And then on a larger scale, 80% of the students that go to the school. Because my take on it was, it is completely unfair and negligent on my behalf as a leader to allow 20% of this student population to disrupt this learning environment for 80%. And I had to come to terms with the fact that, okay, so as a school where we are right now, and I can't talk, I'm sure this is what Joe Clark was also considering, as a school where we are right now and the resources that we have currently, we are unable to give the support that is needed for this 20% of students to shift their behavior, right? And to turn things around. And I had to make the decision in my year one there to basically transition some students who were disrupting school every day. I had to make a decision to transition them out of that school. And I left the door open like, hey, you can come back. But right now, baby, like, this is not the best fit option for you and your needs right now. So I didn't, the blowhorn and the baseball bat, in itself is like, well, damn, like, what kind of message are you sending to millions of people, right, that now know of your story and know of your tactics, going back to what Scylla said about, like, controversial to who. So that's one thing, but to me that's less relevant or important than the need that needed to be addressed, and coming up with the most effective way of getting to that need or getting to that goal, given the status quo of the school at that time and where it needed to go.
Yeah. You see what you said, Jamal, though? I think that that's the difference that we're seeing, and the place that we all met, I think that was one of the biggest issues that we've had, or I say I've had with that environment, was that you have these different people trying to lead a group of people or a community that they have no cultural awareness about, and there's no discernment involved. You understand what I'm saying? You said there are going to be scholars, the 20% or the 300 scholars that Joe Clark, he showed up and he said, you know what? At this point, we cannot serve you all here. You guys' issue is bigger than what an educator is appointed to do. I have to let you guys go and transition into a space that is equipped to help you right where you are. That's what's missing when you have other folks coming into our community trying to take on or lead our people, is that they don't come with discernment. Like, you have to acknowledge where you're like, we can no longer serve you, so we're going to let you go and transition you into a space or an environment that will better serve you. This is what we know how to do, so let's stay in our place and do what we know how to do. You get what I'm saying? Like at the environment we worked at, they didn't expel. I don't think they ever expelled anybody, right? The time that I was there. And we could think of maybe 5 scholars that we were like, yo, if y'all just let them go, this class will function so much better. This cohort or this grade, yes, would function so much better. But you refuse to have discernment because you have a savior complex. And that's the part that our community...
What's a savior complex for the listeners?
We don't need that. Alicia. We don't need any of that. So tell us, what's a savior complex? It's historian.
Sorry. I zoned out. Leisha was just spitting so much knowledge, I zoned out. But yeah, it's this idea that like, basically I am here to save you, right? Like in the most basic terms. You know, guilt is a huge component of that. You know, as a white person, ancestor of a colonizer, I have this idea in my mind that it is my responsibility to come and save these Black children. And that's the root of it.
So I think that's a perfect segue into this idea of like white educators leading.
Wait.
Okay, go ahead, Bethel. I know I was going to come back to something that you said, Bethel, before segueing, but go ahead. And I want to add something to what you said in the first round of exploring Joe Clark. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I think that we are in essence saying the same thing because I think that with Joe Clark, what he essentially was exuding or demonstrating was love, was care, was concern, right? Was safety, right? So when I say do I agree with Joe Clark, his thoughts, like his beliefs? For sure. His underlying beliefs. Yeah. And when I say the tactics of what I essentially, me as a leader, and like he said, walk around with maybe the bullhorn was needed because the school was massive.
3,000
right?
students.
So I don't think, right. So I don't think the bullhorn itself was the problem. Like Leisha said, the execution of it. I think that trying to train Black and brown students for cues, right?
Okay, got it.
Track me, pen to page, that type of stuff, as opposed to, hey, it's time to get to class. Underlying purpose of it, right? For control. So the bullhorn for you to hear me, yes. Right. The bullhorn to train you to listen to cues, no. Right? And then the bat, like you said, I like the 3 strikes, analogy or whatever that he made, but that almost sounds like a level 1, a level 2, a level 3. The bat is like strike, and then you're out, right? So that's what it came across as me. So, I'm triggered when I hear, people trying to use systems, to control Black and brown students. And like you said, JG, like all of us have been in, like these settings. And then, I've been sought out to be in schools because to turn, like you said, schools around. But from a different approach, right? So, I've been in schools and turned them around, and they have outperformed or performed at the same level as their white counterparts without the bat, without the bullhorn, but in essence, the love, the care, the concern, the safety. You get what I'm saying?
I agree with you as it relates to Joe Clark's portrayal and the thing that made him famous or was it looked like power over purpose, when really and truly we always want to err on the side of purpose over power, and lean on me, and when things get commercialized, honey, you lose the spirit of it, you lose the essence of it. I think lean on me, while it was a fabulous, fantastic a needed movie, because like I show it at every school that I go to. And the reason that I show it at every school that I go to is not for the reason that Dr. Bethel is saying. A lot of people look to Joe Clark, right? I show it because I want my students to see the difference between an environment that is conducive to their learning, and also to kind of hold up the mirror of, hey, this is where you are right now as a school. Does this look like a school you want to either be at, a school that you're able to learn at, or whatever the case may be? Does it look like that? But let's also look at an example of another school, right, in which the teacher, and I actually use a coaching video from Miss Boateng. Shout out to Cass. Yeah, I usually use a coaching video from her class, right, to show that, hey, you can be strict, you can be forceful, you can hold the line, you can set expectations and all of these good things in the same way that Joe Clark was doing, but very much like Dr. Bethel is saying, but in a way that sends a message that there's a purpose over power here. And my tactics, like my bat and my blowhorn, are proper, like they're props for the purpose, not props for the power. And I don't think that a lot of people, like Sula is saying, are able to make that
distinction, yeah.
Distinction, thank you. And then it becomes a situation of, well, let's just take what Joe Clark was doing and wrote about in his book, and let's just look at it as, as face value, and not dig deeper into, okay, so what do we think was the purpose behind what he was doing, and how can we adjust the tactic and the execution to meet the need of this school, so that we send the right message to students and to teachers and to parents. So look, you look like you were going to say something.
Yeah, I just, honestly, I don't know. I'm going to have to disagree with the doctor here. Only because...
Not disagree with the doctor.
No, only because, I think that Joe Clark's aesthetics may be displeasing to people, but I think we also need to recognize that he is he was in the Navy, I believe. He was in one of those settings, right?
The Army Reserve. The Army Reserve. So, as a drill sergeant.
Right. So the aesthetics, this is where I agree with you, JG. The aesthetics is not as important, but I think the aesthetics is what makes people get turned off from Joe Clark. But I honestly think his purpose was bigger than power. I don't think that he was power tripping, and I think that we, unfortunately, have been traumatized from being in settings where we see power tripping, and so we're kind of associating that with Dr. Clark. But he said, I've seen in numerous interviews, he said, one, these are adults, 18 and up, that were being dismissed from schools. Two, he's saying that cues are natural. Social cues are something that everyone has to learn. How he's teaching it might be unconventional, but he's not power tripping. I didn't think he was power tripping. And then three, these tactics are not white tactics. Like, I think that that's something that has been a misconception. Is because we see white people standing in front of us doing it for the wrong reason, that we associate these tactics as white tactics. But these are tactics that go all the way back to Africa. Okay, these are tactics of how we educate our children in a way that to white people are unconventional. So that's where I'm gonna have to disagree with you, Doctor.
Okay, so let me ask you a follow-up question. You're shifting my thinking a lot, because two things. I'm thinking, like, if I would have never seen the charter school experience with taxonomy and everything, is it tainting? Probably, or probably not, right? Maybe. But I'm also thinking, if Joe Clark was white and he went into that school with the bullhorn and bat, how would that portrayal of turning the school around come across as well?
Yeah, I think that my final thing on Joe Clark to answer that question is that I believe that his approach was a culturally responsive approach. I 100% believe that. I worked, at a school in Brownsville, and for those folks that are from New York City, particularly Brooklyn, the story behind Brownsville and schools in Brownsville and housing communities in Brownsville and stuff like that with the violence and that kind of stuff. And it was a I had to literally
that approach would be
go home and be like, all right, after week 1 of being on the job, it was all right, I need to do some research. I need to find out, okay, so what's going on in their community? Why, when I call a parent, why are they responding in the way that they're responding when I'm really, why am I, So I think that for
you did your homework.
Joe Clark, his approach was culturally responsive. And if you don't have that culturally responsive lens or awareness, then you can see it as power tripping. You could see it as power over purpose, that kind of stuff. So to answer your question more directly, Dr. Bethel, had it been a white person, one, the image of that is immediately arresting and immediately uncomfortable and immediately like, what? WTF? Like, what's going on here, right? And it pulls these other considerations or factors rather into consideration, like the history of the race dynamic, slavery, that kind of stuff. And so for a white leader, one, I think that person would have to do the same kind of increasing their cultural awareness, and reconciling that with the fact that they're in a white body, and that there are some things that a Black leader might be able to do because they belong to the same affinity group as the students, that as a white person just would not send the same message and have the same effect as a result of the other contributing factors to a situation or to an image like that, right? I would be wholly uncomfortable if it is that a white school leader is to approach turning around a school in the way that Joe Clark did. I'll be wholly uncomfortable with it. At the same time, I would seek to understand, and I would know that it's coming from a place of so on and so forth, or a good place or a place of purpose. But still, the imagery of that just looks really bad, and something that that I've learned, especially as a school leader being on the forefront of school culture, is that things must not only be, but they must also appear to be, which means that being on the forefront of school culture is a performance. It's a big performance, and you have to consider the body that you are in, but you also have to consider your audience and how they're going to perceive you. And the example that I'm going to use to ground it, and I'm going to shut up, is I am a Black, effeminate gay man who has worked in leading school culture, and particularly dealing with behavior by students in particular, or male students who have heteronormative, strong heteronormative beliefs, and who might look at me and have a certain kind of judgment or perception or opinion on how effective I can be Every time I show up at a school, trust and believe. Students and parents look at me like, oh, who are that? What does he think he could come in here to do? And to be honest with you, each time I have to show up in a way like, okay, I know that you think I can't run this shit right here, but I'm about to show you in my body language, in the way that I walk down this hallway, in the way that I speak to you, in the way that I stop you from doing something, in the way that I allow you from doing something, in the way that I respond to a question that you have, in the way that I respond to a classroom, in the way that I just walk into the classroom and just have a seat, right? Because I am able to consider the body that I'm in and how I might be perceived, and also reconcile that with the audience, meaning the students and their parents and the other teachers, and what they need and what they need to see, and how they might perceive what they're seeing and feeling and hearing from me. And as a white school leader, you also have to have that consideration, and you have to be able to adjust your approach accordingly with advice.
Yeah, it takes a heightened level of self-awareness, is what I hear you saying, to be effective. I said it takes a heightened level of self-awareness to be effective in this work. And I really like the quote that you said, right? So things must not only be, but they must also appear to be. I'm still processing that, because that is, it's something we can all take away, right? In being educated.
And I'll fall back, not to
dominate
and take up too much, right? So I think that was a great perspective that you offer, because, you know, for someone who, like you said, who has led specifically from the culture, you know, position, right, and perspective. So I'm also thinking, because like you said, even if it's a person of color who has the bat versus a white person, you know, doesn't necessarily, I want to say, make it okay, because I'm thinking about like, you know, I've had a white principal, right? Like who you said, who might come across as controversial in a sense of, right, not with a bat or whatever, but because he truly cared, right? Because he really believes. So if you heard this white man talk to kids, you might take it as, oh, he's talking down to the kids, or, you know, oh, don't talk like that. You can't talk like that, because certain things you cannot say. Let's just be clear, right, for the record. But I mean, in certain, you know, avenues, because he truly and genuinely, in working with him, like you said, you got to know the person, and things just can't appear to, you know, how they seem or whatever. But because I knew in his heart of heart that he cared, certain other people could not, you know, say or be the way that he was, like you said, because it would come across as basically racist, you know, or policing black and brown students. But I will also, you know, add, I mean, what about black and brown people who don't have who don't share the same background? A lot of these, you know, students who they come into these schools, you know, who have not had the inner city, you know, person of color experience growing up, and they're like a fish out of water. To me, sometimes it's almost worse, because you're looking at I want to say a shell, because I want to be disrespectful, but it's almost like you're looking at this person who looks like me, but we actually don't have anything in common, and you actually don't relate. And the students are expecting you to relate because you, in essence, look like me, but you don't necessarily have the experience that I have. So then that's another, I think that this latter part of the conversation is like 3 topics of like how do we show up as people of color, you know, how do student, staff, and the community perceive us as teachers of color versus white teachers, having the savior complex of like, you all don't have a skill set, so let me come in and rule. But
Courtney, you said something that resonated with me in my experience as an educator, right? I am not from the United States. I'm an immigrant. And I'm from a country where I'm in the majority. And we have a different culture. And in coming into we have a different culture, and we also have a different school culture, across schools in the country. And so when I started teaching in the classroom in high school, I was fish out of water, right? You know this very well, right? I was like, whoa, what the flip is going on, right? Like, I expected to walk into a classroom and have students just do as I say, and be ready to learn and that kind of stuff. And like I said, I was called Joe Clark. And so, I used some of those like tactics, like those no nonsense, no excuses, I'm the one in charge, so on and so forth, without the purpose piece behind it. And I realized that it didn't work, right? It didn't work. And I had to do my homework to find out, okay, so what will they respond to? What has been their experience that manifests itself in the ways that it does in the classroom, right? What do I need to know about these students so that I am better able to, because I'm not going to ease up on my boundaries and my high expectations and my no nonsense and my, having a safe learning environment for all. I'm not going to compromise that, period, poo. But I did have to do the work, right? I did have to do the work to find out, okay, so what do I not know about these students that I need to know in order to better teach them? And I don't think a lot of educators in general approach it in that way. And in particular, white educators that become leaders of Black and Latino schools. And I think that's where a lot of the work has to happen before you even step up into a principalship role, or before you're able to just do it just without consulting or being under advisement of an educator of color, What are your thoughts, Sala?
I'm with it. I agree on all accords. I think, for one, the lens that we come into this profession with makes such a big difference. JG and I, we both come from a Caribbean background. The first Black teacher I've ever had was from Trinidad and Tobago. And shout out to Trinidad and Tobago. And then in middle school, every Black educator was Caribbean. And my parents are Caribbean. So I understand that creates a lens of tactics. So when my teacher was yelling and screaming at me, never once did I feel offended, because in my mind, this is how my parents raised me. And so I think that is very, 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 very important that regardless of our skin tone, Dr. Bethel, absolutely, when we step into a classroom and in a space, we need to be well aware of how we show up, and what's the trauma. Let's call it what it is. What is the trauma that we are stepping into, and deal with it accordingly.
Yeah. So, to the listeners, right? That's the homework for this episode, right? The homework is to believe and to actually practice constantly working and growing your self-awareness, 2, your cultural awareness, and 3, your cultural responsiveness, particularly if you do work at a school of predominantly Black and Hispanic students. Absolutely. Yeah, can we all agree? All right, wonderful. So let's wrap up the episode. Let's wrap up the episode with a segment that we like to call Filling Your Cup. All right. And during this segment, we want to offer some self-care tips to our listeners. One of the things that educators are very guilty of is not taking enough care of themselves, right? The work does not start at 8 o'clock and end at 3. Because we know we're up at 4, we're up at 5, getting those administrative duties out the door before we can, get to those lesson plans and get to this and get to the other thing and whatever the case may be. And that we're at school until 9 p.m. grading papers, updating the grade book, and working on different things. And so most times we neglect to take care of ourselves. So let's do a quick whip around and give our listeners some self-care tips. School is reopening next week. Tomorrow. Tomorrow. Is you ready, honey? All right, so let's start with Miss Leisha. What you got for the people?
Alrighty, so what I want us all to do is write our affirmations for the day. And this will help us channel our energy, right? You want to build your energy up before you're even involving or contributing or engaging with other people's energy, right? So you decide what your day will look like.
So decide what your day is going to look like and be the energy in the room.
That's my tip.
Love that. Let's whip to Dr. Bethel.
Yeah, I love that. And then you can see Leisha's skin is just glowing. I'm going to need those tips offline or online. Okay? Skin is popping. Yeah. I think for me, like Leisha said, and then like you said, JG, of I start my mornings at about 5 a.m., right? I do my daily meditations. I read, I pray. If I have time, I watch a sermon. I journal a lot. And then also, I've been trying to exercise more because I figured when I exercise before work, it helps increase my stamina. It opens my mind up. It relieves stress. Yeah. And then also just taking time to read a personal book and a professional. So something I'm reading right now is Atomic Habits. It was recommended. That's good based on the mentor program I'm in. Yeah. One of my mentors. And then also talking about culturally responsive teaching. Read Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain by Zaretta Hammonds. It's a game changer. So
maybe we can get that author on here at some point. Yeah. Yeah, that was phenomenal. All right, Scylla.
Yeah.
Something I have come up with is pass the umbrella. Okay. As educators, we tend to hold up that umbrella and we feel like we have to do everything for everyone. It is okay to put some of the weight on your friends, your family, your coworkers. You don't have to do everything. So this week, wherever your list is overflowing, pass that umbrella.
All right, pass the umbrella. I've never heard of that before. Okay. For me, it's creating boundaries. Boundaries around your work. Last day has taught me to make a distinction between what really matters and what does not. At any given moment in time or any given period or season in your life, right? And so for me, I know that creating boundaries is something that has helped me reduce the stress that can come from being an educator. And when I say create boundaries, what I mean is you have to be able to say, all right, so I'm going to start work at 8:00, especially in this virtual setting. And I'm really going to finish at 4 and stick to that. Right. And something that helps is within those hours, if you're 8 to 4, you allocate set times to certain things. Right. I know that if you're in the classroom, it's a bit different because you have your periods throughout the day. And if you're in administration, it's a bit different because you have meetings and all other duties to take care of. But set time, just like a period in class is 40 minutes in some places, 50 minutes in some places, and we end on time. We need to do that for our administrative work too, right? That, hey, I'm checking emails only between 11 and 11:45. Then I'm going to take 15 minutes to read something. And then at 12, I'm taking my lunch. And that's what I'm doing. And I'm not answering emails during my lunch. I'm not having a conversation at work during my lunch, right? So setting those boundaries. And if you become overwhelmed about the work that's piling up, setting a boundary also can look like choosing one day a week to work late. Dr. Bethel, we used to do this, right? That we used to say, all right, so on Tuesday and Thursday, those are our late night days. And that's it, right? I'm not working late every day. I'm going to just stick to Tuesday and Thursday, or to just Wednesday, I'm working late, or Wednesday, I'm getting up an hour earlier to knock some things out. So putting those boundaries in place around how much time you're spending working. Yeah. All right. So that brings us to the end of episode 1 of this most fantastic, informative, fun, exciting podcast, the Teachers Workroom Podcast. We hope that you were entertained, but we also hope that you were educated in the process and edified and enlightened, and all the words you can find with E at the beginning. Make sure that you follow us on Facebook at the Teachers Workroom Podcast. Follow us, like all our content. It's the same for Instagram at the Teachers Workroom Podcast. Follow us, like us. If you want to reach out to us, please email us at teachersworkroom.podcast@gmail.com. And make sure that you stream our podcast on all the platforms available. YouTube at the Teachers Workroom Podcast on YouTube. Then there's going to be Spotify and Apple Podcasts and all the other podcast platforms that you can find. It's been wonderful chatting. And until next time, bye.
Bye.
Okay, y'all. So I'm going to end the recording.
Bye.
And then we can get back on this.